I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would derive satisfaction from another person's downfall, especially not someone I once loved more than life itself. But standing here now, watching Laura's face crumple as realization dawns on her, I feel nothing but a cold sense of justice being served. "You can't do this," she whispers, her voice breaking. "Everything we built, it was together." I simply slide the prenuptial agreement across the table, my finger tapping the clause she had signed so carelessly 3 years ago. "Page 4, Section 12, Laura. You should have read the fine print. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I became this version of David Harrison, calculated, unyielding, and utterly devoid of the compassion that once defined me, you need to know the whole story. 3 weeks earlier, I was rushing through the airport terminal, a bouquet of red roses clutched in my hand, and a smile that wouldn't quit plastered across my face. I had cut my business trip to Chicago short by a day, determined to surprise Laura on our 3rd wedding anniversary. In my pocket was a small velvet box containing a pair of sapphire earrings that matched the color of her eyes. Eyes I once thought I could drown in forever. The cab ride home was filled with anticipation. I remembered how we met in college, her sitting alone in the campus coffee shop, sketching in a worn notebook. I had approached her, awkward and nervous, and somehow managed to make her laugh. From that moment, Laura Winters became the center of my universe. We were inseparable throughout college, and our wedding day 3 years ago had felt like the natural progression of a love story written in the stars. As the taxi pulled up to our brownstone, I noticed Michael's car parked across the street. Michael Chen, my best friend since high school, was probably helping Laura set up for whatever modest celebration she had planned for when I was supposed to return tomorrow. I smiled at the thought. It was so like Laura to want everything perfect, and so like Michael to be the friend who'd drop everything to help. I paid the driver, giving him a generous tip in my good mood, and walked up the steps to our front door. Using my key, I entered quietly, planning to surprise them both. The house was oddly silent, but I could hear faint sounds coming from upstairs. Music, perhaps, and laughter. Setting the roses down on the entryway table, I crept up the stairs, a childish excitement building in me at the thought of Laura's surprised face. The bedroom door was partially open, and as I approached, the sounds became clearer. It wasn't just music I was hearing. One more step, and I could see into the room through the crack in the door. Time stopped. Laura was there, all right. So was Michael. They were tangled in our bed, the same bed where I had held her through nightmares, where we had planned our future, where I thought we had made love. But what I was witnessing wasn't love. It was betrayal in its rawest form. I must have made a sound because Laura's head suddenly turned toward the door. Our eyes locked, and in that instant, I saw not shock or remorse, but annoyance at being interrupted. "David," she said flatly, making no move to cover herself or disengage from Michael, who had the decency to at least look horrified. "You're not supposed to be home until tomorrow." The casualness of her statement was like a knife to my chest. I stood frozen, unable to process the scene before me. "How long?" I finally managed to ask, my voice strangely calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. Laura sighed, as if my question was an inconvenience. "Does it matter?" "It's been about 8 months," Michael supplied, at least having the grace to look ashamed as he pulled the sheet up to cover himself. 8 months. While I was working late to build our future, traveling to secure clients that would ensure Laura's gallery could flourish, they had been making a fool of me. "I never really loved you, David," Laura said, her voice eerily detached. "You were safe, reliable. But with Michael, it's real. It's passionate." Each word was a sledgehammer to the life I thought we had built. I looked at Michael, the friend who had been my best man, who had consoled me through my parents' bitter divorce, who had promised to always have my back. "And you," I said softly. My brother in all but blood. Michael couldn't hold my gaze. I'm sorry, David. It just happened. A strange calm settled over me then, a clarity I hadn't expected. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, down the stairs, past the roses now seeming like a cruel joke, and out the front door. I could hear Laura calling after me half-heartedly, but I didn't stop. I got into my car and drove to a hotel, checked in, and sat on the edge of the bed in the sterile room for hours, not moving, barely breathing. When dawn broke, I called my sister, Emily. I need a place to stay, I said when she answered. And I need a lawyer. My parents' divorce had been a scorched earth affair. My father had cheated, and my mother had used every legal means at her disposal to ensure he paid for his betrayal. The custody battle over my sister and me had been ugly, turning us into weapons rather than children. I had sworn I would never put anyone through that kind of pain, would never be the cause of such betrayal. Ironic, then, that I had insisted on a prenuptial agreement when Laura and I got engaged, not because I didn't trust her, God, I had trusted her implicitly, but because I wanted clear boundaries that would prevent the kind of messy, hurtful dissolution I had witnessed as a child. It's just a formality, I had assured her as we sat in the lawyer's office. Something to protect both of us. Laura had been mildly offended at first. Don't you trust me? She had asked, her blue eyes wide with hurt. Of course I do, I had replied. This isn't about trust. It's about being practical. She had relented, scanning the document quickly before signing it with a flourish, then kissing me deeply. There, she had said. Now can we get back to planning our perfect life? What Laura hadn't bothered to read, what most people in love don't bother to read, were the specific clauses buried in the legalese, particularly the infidelity clause that my lawyer had included at my insistence. In the event that either party engages in extramarital relations, resulting in the dissolution of the marriage, all joint financial assets, properties, and business investments shall be awarded to the non-offending party. Furthermore, any businesses financially supported by the non-offending party shall revert entirely to said party's control. Emily, a corporate lawyer herself, reviewed the agreement as I sat in her guest room the day after discovering Laura's betrayal. This is airtight, David, she said, looking up from the document. But are you sure you want to go through with this? It will destroy her. I thought about Laura's cold eyes as she told me she had never loved me, about the 8 months of lies, about Michael's betrayal. She destroyed us first, I replied. I'm just making sure I don't go down with the wreckage. For 2 weeks, I said nothing to Laura. I didn't return her increasingly frantic calls and texts. Through Emily, I learned that Laura and Michael were still seeing each other, that they had moved him into our home mere days after I left. They thought I was simply licking my wounds, perhaps preparing for a standard divorce where we'd split everything down the middle, the house, the savings, the investments. What they didn't know was that I was methodically preparing for war. I hired a private investigator to document their ongoing affair, gathering incontrovertible evidence of Laura's infidelity. I consulted with financial advisors about the legal transfer of assets. And most importantly, I waited for Laura to make a mistake. It came sooner than expected. 2 weeks after I walked out, Laura attempted to withdraw a large sum from our joint business account, presumably to keep her gallery afloat. That was all the justification I needed. The morning of my revenge was bright and clear, a beautiful autumn day that belied the storm I was about to unleash. With Emily by my side for moral support and legal backup, I set my plan in motion. First, I transferred all funds from our joint accounts into a new account solely in my name, a move that was completely legal given the documented infidelity and the terms of our prenuptial agreement. Then I contacted the gallery's landlord and informed him that I was withdrawing my financial support and would not be renewing the lease that was, conveniently, up for renewal that month. Finally, I hired a moving company. While Laura was at the gallery, frantically trying to understand why her credit cards were being declined and her checks were bouncing, a team of movers entered our home and removed everything of value: the furniture, the artwork, the electronics. Everything except her personal clothing and toiletries. By the time Laura returned home that evening, the house was a shell of itself. I imagine her walking through the empty rooms, confusion giving way to dawning horror as she realized what was happening. Her call came at 9:43 p.m. "What have you done?" she screamed when I answered. "Where is everything? What did you do to the accounts?" "I think you know exactly what I've done, Laura," I replied calmly. "Why don't we meet tomorrow to discuss the details? Say, noon at the Capitol Grill." She agreed, still shouting accusations and threats that I let wash over me like so much white noise. The next day, I arrived at the restaurant early, securing a private dining room where we wouldn't be disturbed. I was dressed in my best suit, the one Laura had always said made me look powerful. Today, I needed that power. She arrived 10 minutes late, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair hastily pulled back. Michael trailed behind her like a shadow. "You brought him," I observed as they sat down across from me. "Interesting choice." "He's part of this now," Laura snapped. "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say to both of us." I nodded, oddly grateful for Michael's presence. It would make what came next all the more satisfying. "Very well," I said, sliding a folder across the table. "These are copies of the relevant documents: the prenuptial agreement, evidence of your infidelity, and statements showing the current disposition of our assets." Laura flipped open the folder, her eyes scanning the first page of the prenup. I watched as her expression changed from anger to confusion to horror as she reached the infidelity clause. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything we built, it was together." I simply tapped the clause she had signed so carelessly 3 years ago. "Page 4, Section 12, Laura. You should have read the fine print." She turned to the next document. Photographs of her and Michael entering and leaving hotels, time-stamped text messages, credit card receipts for romantic dinners, irrefutable evidence of her betrayal. "This is insane," Michael interjected. "You can't just take everything. There are laws." "Which is why I had Laura sign this specific agreement," I cut him off. "An agreement that has been reviewed by multiple attorneys and deemed entirely enforceable. So yes, Michael, I can just take everything, and I have." Laura was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "The gallery," she choked out. "That's my dream. You can't take that from me." "Your dream that was financed entirely by my investments," I corrected her. "Investments that, according to our agreement, revert to me in case of your infidelity. The landlord has already been notified that the lease won't be renewed. Your staff has been informed that the gallery is closing." "You son of a bitch," Michael snarled, starting to rise from his seat. I held up a hand. "Before you do something foolish, you should know that I've also taken the liberty of informing your employer about your affair with my wife. Fraternizing with the spouse of a major client is generally frowned upon in investment banking, isn't it?" Michael sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. His career at the prestigious firm where he worked was as good as over. "Why are you doing this?" Laura asked, her voice small. "I know I hurt you, but this is cruel." For the first time since sitting down, I allowed some of my true feelings to show. "Cruel? Let me tell you what's cruel, Laura. Cruel is lying to someone's face for 8 months. Cruel is sleeping with their best friend in their own bed. Cruel is telling them you never loved them after they've given you everything." I leaned forward, my voice low but intense. "I'm not being cruel. I'm ensuring that actions have consequences. Something you apparently never considered." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. "I've paid for lunch. Enjoy it. It might be the last expensive meal you have for a while." As I walked out, I heard Laura call after me, her voice breaking. "David, please. I made a mistake. We can work through this." I paused at the door, looking back at the woman I had once loved more than anything. "No, Laura. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. And now, so have I." The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick, given the clarity of the prenuptial agreement and the overwhelming evidence of Laura's infidelity. She hired a lawyer who made some noise about contesting the agreement, but it was a futile effort. Within 3 months, our marriage was legally dissolved, and I retained everything of value. Laura's gallery closed its doors a month after our lunch meeting. Without my financial backing, she couldn't afford to keep it running. Her reputation in the art world, once promising, was tarnished by rumors of the scandal and her sudden financial downfall. According to Emily, who somehow still knew people who knew Laura, she and Michael had moved into a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. Michael had indeed lost his job and was struggling to find comparable employment, the stain of his ethical breach following him through the industry. As for me, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. The financial firm where I had been a rising star before the divorce now viewed me as something of a cutthroat genius, my personal and financial victory over Laura adding a certain mystique to my professional reputation. Clients were drawn to my meticulous attention to detail and unwavering commitment to protecting assets. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I sold the brownstone, unable to walk through rooms that held so many tainted memories. I purchased a sleek, modern penthouse overlooking the city, a bachelor pad that bore no resemblance to the warm, art-filled home Laura and I had created together. I traveled extensively for both business and pleasure, exploring cities I had always wanted to visit but had postponed for someday with Laura. Tokyo, Sydney, Cape Town, Rio. I collected experiences instead of relationships, keeping people at a safe distance. 1 year to the day after discovering Laura's betrayal, I received an unexpected email from her. "David, I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did was unforgivable, and I've had a year to reflect on the pain I caused. I won't make excuses or try to justify my actions. I simply want you to know that I understand now what I threw away, and I am truly sorry." Michael left 3 months ago. The hardship was too much for him, I suppose. Or perhaps what we had wasn't love after all, just selfishness disguised as passion. I'm working as a sales associate at a small gallery now. The owner doesn't know about my past, and I'm grateful for the chance to stay connected to art in some way, even if I'll never have my own space again. I hope you found some peace. You deserved better than what I gave you. Laura. I read the email several times, searching for the emotional response I expected. Vindication, perhaps, or satisfaction at her continued suffering. Instead, I felt a strange hollowness, as if the final piece of our story had fallen into place, leaving nothing but an empty space where love and hate had once resided. I never replied to the email. There was nothing left to say. 2 years after the divorce, at a charity gala I was attending for work, I found myself bidding on a small, striking painting during the silent auction. It wasn't until I won and examined the piece more closely that I noticed the signature in the corner, L. Harrison. Laura had reverted to using my last name in her art, though she had gone back to her maiden name, Winters, legally after the divorce. The painting was of a man standing alone on a cliff edge, his back to the viewer, facing a stormy sea. The brushwork was turbulent, emotional, raw in a way Laura's earlier work had never been. It was good, better than anything she had created during our marriage. I hung it in my home office, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of how pain can transform us, how loss can strip away artifice and force growth. Whether Laura had intended the painting as a message to me or simply as an expression of her own journey, I'll never know. I never reached out to ask. 3 years after the divorce, my life had settled into a comfortable routine. Work, travel, casual dating that never progressed to anything serious. I had made peace with the idea that perhaps deep connection wasn't in the cards for me again, that the price of such vulnerability was too high. Then came the day that changed everything once more. I was in San Francisco for a conference, having just delivered a well-received presentation on investment strategies. As I made my way through the hotel lobby, a familiar voice called my name. David? David Harrison? I turned to find Michael Chen standing there, looking both nervous and determined. He was noticeably different from the polished banker I had once called my friend. Thinner, with a hint of gray at his temples, dressed in clothes that spoke of reduced circumstances. "Michael," I acknowledged, my tone neutral. "This is unexpected." "I've been trying to work up the courage to reach out for months," he said. "I heard you were speaking at the conference and, well, I needed to see you." I should have walked away. There was nothing this man could say that would undo his betrayal. But curiosity got the better of me. 5 minutes, I said, gesturing to the hotel bar. "That's all you get." We sat at a corner table, two once inseparable friends now separated by an unbridgeable chasm of betrayal and consequences. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Michael began, surprising me. "What I did was unforgivable, and I've paid for it every day since. My career is in shambles. I've lost friends, respect, everything that once mattered to me." "I'm struggling to find sympathy," I replied coldly. He shook his head. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm here because there's something you should know, something Laura never told you." Despite myself, I felt a flicker of interest. "Go on." Michael took a deep breath. "The affair? It didn't just happen. Laura pursued me aggressively for months. I refused at first, told her how wrong it was. But she was persistent, and I was weak." I laughed bitterly. "That's your big revelation? That you were seduced? Poor Michael, helpless against my wife's charms." "No, you don't understand," he insisted. "She had a plan. She wanted out of the marriage but didn't want to lose her lifestyle or the gallery. She knew about the prenup, but thought if she could get me to fall for her, together we could contest it somehow, claim that you had abandoned the marriage emotionally." I stared at him, processing this information. "You expect me to believe that Laura, my wife of 3 years, orchestrated an elaborate scheme to leave me while keeping my money?" Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table much as I had done to Laura in the restaurant years ago. After what happened, Laura became increasingly bitter. When things got tough, she blamed me for not being smart enough to avoid getting caught, for ruining her life. One night when she was drunk, she told me everything. I opened the folder to find printouts of emails from Laura to Michael, dating back to before our 3rd anniversary. The first one sent a chill down my spine. "Michael, I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you. David is a good man, but he's not enough for me. Never has been. I need more, and I think you could be that more. Don't worry about the prenup. If things go south, I have a plan. David travels so much, works such long hours. It would be easy to claim emotional abandonment. My lawyer says that could invalidate the fidelity clause if we play it right. Just think about it. We could have everything. Each other, the house, my gallery, his money. All we have to do is be smart about this." Laura. There were dozens more, each more calculating than the last. In them, Laura outlined her strategy, her timeline, her contingency plans. She had never anticipated being caught as she was, had planned to manufacture evidence of emotional neglect on my part before carefully revealing the affair in a controlled way. "Why show me this now?" I asked, struggling to reconcile this new information with my understanding of the woman I had married. Michael looked down at his hands. "Because I realized that what I did to you wasn't just a betrayal of friendship. It was participating in something truly evil. And because she's trying to rebuild her reputation, telling people that you were abusive, controlling, that the prenup was coerced. She's even writing a memoir about surviving financial abuse. My blood ran cold. A memoir? He nodded. She's shopping it to publishers, calling it The Price of Freedom, How I Survived My Millionaire Husband's Revenge. She's positioning herself as a victim of the patriarchy, of unfair legal systems that favor wealthy men. I sat back, absorbing this final betrayal. Even now, years later, Laura was attempting to rewrite our history, to paint herself as the wronged party. What do you want from me, Michael? A thank you? Absolution? Neither, he replied simply. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. All of it. What you do with it is up to you. He stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, David, destroying our friendship is the greatest regret of my life. Not because of what it cost me, but because of who you were. The best man I've ever known. After he left, I sat alone at the table for a long time, the folder of emails like a live grenade in front of me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue the life I had rebuilt without allowing Laura back into it in any form. But another part, the part that had always valued truth above all else, knew I couldn't let her new narrative stand unchallenged. The decision wasn't made in anger. That was important to me. That whatever action I took next wasn't fueled by the same rage and pain that had driven my initial revenge. This would be calculated, measured, a surgical strike rather than a scorched earth campaign. I hired a top PR firm and a team of investigators to verify the emails Michael had provided. They were authentic. Furthermore, their investigation uncovered a partial manuscript of Laura's memoir, obtained through legal channels from a literary agent who had ethical concerns about its contents. The manuscript was everything Michael had described, a complete inversion of reality, painting me as controlling and emotionally abusive, the prenup as something I had manipulated her into signing, the affair as her desperate bid for freedom from a gilded cage. With the evidence in hand, I had several options. I could sue for defamation, ensuring a public legal battle that would dredge up all the pain again. I could publicly release the emails, exposing Laura's true nature and plans. Either approach would likely destroy what remained of her rebuilding efforts. Instead, I chose a third path. Through intermediaries, I reached out to Laura with a simple offer: cease work on the memoir and sign a legally binding agreement never to publicly discuss our marriage or divorce. And in return, I would establish a trust that would provide her with a modest but comfortable income for the rest of her life, enough to open a small gallery of her own again, if she wished. The message was clear. I was offering her a chance at the fresh start she claimed to want, but on terms that acknowledged and respected the truth of our history. Her response came 3 days later, acceptance of my terms, along with a handwritten note. David, I don't deserve your generosity, however conditional it may be. I've spent years blaming you for the consequences of my own actions, unable to face the truth of what I did and who I became. The woman who wrote those emails to Michael, who plotted to take everything from you while giving nothing of herself. I don't recognize her anymore, but I can't deny she was me. I accept your terms not just for the financial security, but for the chance to finally close this chapter with some small shred of dignity. Not the false dignity of victimhood I've been hiding behind, but the real dignity that comes with finally facing the truth. You were always the better person between us. This only confirms what I've known for years. Thank you for this undeserved mercy. Laura, 6 months later, I attended the opening of a small but elegant gallery in a neighboring city. From across the room, I watched Laura greet guests, her face animated as she discussed the works on display. She had lost the hardened bitterness that had characterized her in the aftermath of our divorce, replaced by a quieter, more authentic presence. She saw me halfway through the evening, our eyes meeting briefly across the crowded space. She gave a small, solemn nod, acknowledgement, not of forgiveness granted or received, but of a truth finally honored by both of us. I left without speaking to her. There was nothing more to say. In the years that followed, I slowly opened myself to the possibility of love again. Not the blind, all-consuming devotion of youth, but something more measured, more grounded in reality and mutual respect. I met Rebecca, a pediatric surgeon with a straightforward manner and a laugh that could light up a room, at a hospital fundraiser. Our relationship progressed with a deliberate carefulness that some might have found unromantic, but that felt right to both of us. When I proposed after 2 years of dating, I did so with complete transparency about my past, the prenuptial agreement I would again require, and my boundaries. Rebecca, with the same directness that had first attracted me to her, appreciated my honesty and had her own lawyer review everything before signing. "I'm not marrying you for your money," she told me on our wedding day. "I'm marrying you for your integrity." Occasionally, I hear about Laura through mutual acquaintances. Her gallery is modestly successful, focusing on emerging artists rather than the blue-chip names she once coveted. She never remarried, choosing instead to build a life centered around her art and a small circle of close friends. As for Michael, I heard he eventually relocated to the Midwest, starting over in a smaller financial firm. We have had no further contact. The email folder he provided both his final betrayal of Laura and his last act of friendship toward me. The painting still hangs in my office, the man on the cliff facing the storm. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I study it and wonder if either of us really won in the end. Laura lost her dreams and her reputation, but gained a hard-won authenticity. I kept my financial security and exacted my revenge, but lost years to anger and isolation. But then I come home to Rebecca and our daughter, to a life built on a foundation of honest communication and mutual respect, and I know that the real victory wasn't in the revenge at all. It was in learning to recognize the value of truth, in prenuptial agreements, in relationships, and most importantly, in myself. Some might say I was harsh, even cruel, in how I handled Laura's betrayal. Perhaps they're right. But in a world where actions often seem to carry no consequences, where vows are broken without thought and loyalty is treated as optional, I stand by the choice I made to ensure that, at least in our story, cause and effect remained firmly linked. That is a principle I can live with, a lesson worth the pain it took to learn, and a legacy I hope to pass on to my daughter. Read the fine print, honor your word, and remember that true freedom comes not from escaping consequences, but from having the courage to face them. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.